everybody. This is Alan Peterson, the host of Meet the Thriller Author. And today I'm going to be talking with thriller author C.E. Martin. Are you there, C.E.?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us and Meet the Thriller Author. Before I get started with some questions, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in southern Indiana, just across the river from Louisville, Kentucky, here in the Midwest. I'm 47 years old. I have a wife and 2 daughters. I retired last year after almost 20 years in the criminal justice career field. I was an investigator for the prosecuting attorney, and I just had enough of that and gave it up. Now I write on the weekends, and I work for my friend who's an attorney in his office until the writing thing really takes off.
That's a great background, though, so you must be able to have a good source for your books, then.
Well, oddly enough, even though when I was young and I really started thinking about being a writer, it was because I read a lot of mysteries like Ellery Queen magazine, and I enjoyed we had a thing here in the Midwest on a radio station, WHAS. It was called the Mystery Radio Theater Show or something. Every weekend they would have like an old-style radio murder mystery. Even though I loved that kind of stuff when I was younger, I don't write, and I've got the criminal background. I don't write crime stuff. All my stuff's supernatural science fiction things, because my grandfather got me hooked on sci-fi when I was a teenager, and now when I do read, it's men's adventure or pulp novels or sci-fi that I like to read. And I haven't read murder mysteries in years. Plus, I got my fill of crime. Actually working real crime. So
yeah, that's what I was going to say. So you probably want to take a break from that stuff and
definitely
and do the other stuff that you like. Tell us a little bit about your books then that you have out right now.
Since 2012, I've been concentrating on a series called Stone Soldiers, and it's a super soldiers versus the supernatural. I'm a big fan of the TV show Supernatural and X-Files, and even going as far back as Carl Kolchak, the Night Stalker. I've always enjoyed those kind of programs. And I saw the movie Dreamcatcher, based on the Stephen King book, and I really liked the Blue Boy unit in it. And so when I heard about Amazon's Kindle program, I thought, I need to write something that I could serialize in case this works. And I had done a screenplay the year before for Amazon Studios. And in that one, I did a young adult kind of thing where I tried to be a writer back in the 80s and 90s, didn't get anywhere with it. And I had a whole bunch of projects I did. And I took characters from those projects and put them together and kind of polished it up and modernized it. And it's basically a military version of the TV show Supernatural, where it's soldiers instead of just 2 random guys running around killing monsters. It's an organized government unit, and the military aren't the bad guys in this. That was one of the main reasons why I wanted to do it. I'm a veteran, and it bothers me a lot how the military are either buffoons or bad guys, or they're the cavalry that comes raining in at the last minute of the movie. It's as a writer's lazy way out.
And now, do you draw from your military background then for your books?
Yes and no. I mean, I worked third shift. I was a law enforcement specialist in the Air Force. Back then, it was called Security Police. Now they call it Security Forces, and the mission has changed a little bit. But basically, we were responsible for security on the base. The law enforcement guys, we would drive around and, write tickets, break up fights at the bars, respond to calls in the barracks, that kind of thing. Traditional police work. And then we had security specialists that guarded the airplanes or maybe were at missile bunkers, that kind of thing. As I was getting out, they were kind of doing crossover training, so we had to be security certified too. And on third shift, we called it rivet counting, where you would guard an airplane and you're sitting there staring at an airplane. Yep, still here. Yep, still here. Because you got to make sure they have special security zones and there's procedures. You're bored out of your mind. If you're lucky enough to have a partner, or there's a roving patrol that checks on you every now and then, third shift we would tell ghost stories. And I heard so many great ones when I was in. And I haven't really used a lot of that in the books yet. I do have a new spin-off series that I'm working on that's going to launch next month. It's not going to be as often as my Stone Soldiers series is. I probably only do 2 of those a year. It's called Shadow Raiders. And for the second book in that series, I'm taking a tall tale that I heard about Area 51, and I'm incorporating that into the book.
Oh, that'll be interesting. So a lot of interest in Area 51 too. So that'll be kind of
definitely.
Cool. Yeah. So now with your Stone Soldiers, you mentioned, is it a serial then? Is it like episodic?
No, it's more of a pulp men's adventure style novel where each book is a standalone adventure. You could pick it up just like any TV show. You could watch, like X-Files had an overlying story arc from beginning of the show to the end of the show about the UFOs and the aliens and everything. But then there were episodes that were standalones, like about a werewolf or the mutated guy who could fit down sewer pipes. There was different singles. I've tried to make my book series the same, where anybody can pick one up, never have read any of the other ones, and enjoy it. They're not going to miss anything, but there is some underlying story elements that carry over from one book to the next. It also adds realism because a military unit, people talk about stuff they've done in the past. So if you're reading book 9 and you've never read any of the others, you might hear some references to things in the past, but you might not realize that they were previously in the series because people talk about things that have previously happened. And then if you wanted to go back, you could read those previous ones, but you don't have to. I'm breaking that rule with book 12 in the series. It'll be out this fall, where it's a continuation of events that I laid out the groundwork for from books 1 through 11. So that one you do actually need to read the previous series, and there'll be a warning in the beginning of it to let people know that. But generally, every book is a standalone adventure.
With the same characters throughout the series?
Yes, sort of. I have the main core characters, but I always try and introduce a new character so that there's a character that the reader can follow along with, and the reader is exposed to the universe for the first time through that character's eyes. Plus, for people who've been in the service, you're constantly getting new people into your unit. People retire or they get transferred to another unit. Somebody comes in and takes their place. So it's normal to have that changeover. You don't see that on TV because audiences, fall in love with certain actors or characters. So unless their character is killed, they don't just disappear. You very rarely see people just move away. So you have the core number never really changes. They might add somebody in. And I try and I've killed a few people off, but a lot of times I have people, they're kind of like guest stars, I guess you could say. For example, book 9, the military team meets a private detective in Hollywood who is haunted by a poltergeist. It's the poltergeist of his dead partner. And the dead partner is hanging around because he never got that big case he was always promised. So they're like a team. They work together, and the private detective can see ghosts. That's his special power. So he's basically got a ghost partner who can go in and break in places and look around. And they help the military team fight the bad guy in the book. But then when the book's over, they go off on their own. They don't join the military unit. Sometimes I have the characters join the military unit, sometimes not.
Well, and when did you publish your first book?
The first one I think I did in June or July of 2012, and that was Mythical. That was number 1 in the series.
Okay, wow. And how many books do you plan to do you publish a year? Do you have a certain amount that you're trying to do, or?
Before I retired, I was lucky to get 3 done a year, and I took 6 months last year where I only worked part-time and was living on my retirement money and my part-time pay. Health insurance ate up all my retirement money. I was able to squeeze out a couple extra that I normally wouldn't have been able to. Now that I'm back to full-time work, this is writing is a weekend task again, and I have 2 daughters. One's a teenager, one's a 9-year-old, and I spend a lot of time with them in the summer, so it just depends. Sometimes I have more time than others to write. And I do 3 books a year. My goal is 6, but I don't think I've ever hit 6.
Hey, 3 is pretty good.
Yeah, 3 is really pushing it because it's finding the time to sit down and actually write. I'm a binge writer. I like to write for 8-10 hours at a time.
Oh, wow.
I can't do 1 hour because when the hour's up, I can't quit. It's like I'm addicted to it, like playing a video game or something. I don't want to stop. So if I don't have at least 3 hours that I can sit down, I don't even write. I'll work on outlining or research or trying to come up with ways to promote or something like that.
And now, where do you usually write when you get into the zone?
I type pretty fast, only it's not really typing. It's more of a hunt and peck. I never really learned to type, but I've been a computer nerd since the days of the Commodore 64, and I've gone through a lot of computer systems. So I type about 50 or 60 words a minute, so I can I can crank out between 2,000 and 3,000 words an hour. I think my record for one night before my carpal tunnel flared up was about 15 to 16,000 words, and that was with stopping to go get snacks, bathroom breaks. Hey, you kids, be quiet, that kind of stuff.
Pretty impressive output.
Well, now that's with my other secret is I just keep writing. I don't stop for mistakes. If I spell something wrong or I miss a comma or something, I just keep going. Because if I stop to go back and correct it, it takes me out of my stream of consciousness. And I prefer to go back later. Of course, sometimes when I go back later, I'm like, what in the hell is this? What was I thinking? Where was I going with this? What is that word? But generally, that helps me go really fast, and I can just, I've got my outline on my phone, and so I can look at my phone. I keep notes on my phone, and then I use a smart tab, or not smart. I use a tablet with a wireless keyboard. That's what I actually write on. I'm in a recliner. I've got like this articulated arm that holds the tablet up like a screen, and it's very sci-fi like. I got a cup holder on my recliner. I redneck bolted onto it, and I could just go crazy typing until, like I said, I got to take a break, or my carpal tunnel is just so bad I have to quit for the night.
And so now you mentioned that you were starting a new series. Do you jump between the two then, the Stone Soldiers, and what was the other one, the Shadow
Raiders?
Shadow Raiders.
What happened was, as I wrote the Stone Soldiers, just things started. When you write a series like that. For me at least, things kind of evolve on their own. The characters take on a life of their own. You write one story and you'll put something in it and you're like, hey, you know what? I can develop that idea more. And eventually I got to the point where the team had discovered these prehistoric portals that were magical gateways to different places on the earth. In one of the books, they even are able to go to the moon through one. And it got me thinking. And so for Shadow Raiders, it's a spin-off series where part of the team will go on these adventures twice a year, where, one of the military concepts is, why fight the bad guys here in our backyard? It's better to fight the bad guys in their backyard. And the Stone Soldiers series has always been about, there's a threat to America, so these super soldiers go and they fight these monsters and, preserve America. Of course, some of the fights are elsewhere and, they end up protecting the whole world. So it got me thinking, it would be cool if I could take them to the planes of existence where the monsters live. If you could go to Valhalla and the Viking gods weren't nice guys, they were bad guys, and attack them there. Kind of like a magical, I guess I would call it a mashup of Stargate and Supernatural. And so that's what the new series is about. It's Shadow Raiders is the first one. That's what they do. They go to Asgard and they're fighting. I love the movie Thor, but everybody's wanting to put a positive spin on the Norse gods, and in a lot of mythology, they weren't nice, cool, happy-go-lucky people. They were, mean and capricious and tormented mankind. So I like the idea of these are soldiers that are taking the fight to the bad guys where the bad guys live. So they are raiding the shadows where the monsters live. Of course, those monsters come from the shadows and raid Earth periodically. So it's a double meaning for book one in the series, Shadow Raiders.
Oh. And now, are your stories set like in our time, or is it like a parallel universe? Oh, okay.
Well, it's sort of an alternate reality. I've tried to touch on that here and there, and I've dropped little clues. Like I've mentioned presidents that weren't presidents we had, because the whole basic concept is magic is still in the world. There are monsters and things that have survived into the modern era. Not like TV shows where, like nobody knows there's a vampire. In this world, there is some magic. Most people are skeptical of it. And I even make fun of comic books in one or two books where I mentioned there was a brief period where people with psychic abilities would put on costumes and try and fight crime, and it all ended up becoming a commercial enterprise. But everybody's forgotten about it because it was back in the 80s. It's kind of a mishmash of comics and pro wrestling, because I loved pro wrestling back in the 80s when I was younger. I used to watch, I can't remember what it was called back then. They've changed the name. Oh, yeah. I think it was WWF wrestling back then, Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik and the British Bulldogs. I loved all that stuff back then and thought of it as like comic books come to life. So I've gone back, and that's kind of the background, is there was some magic in the public eye in the 80s, but it's kind of faded away. And basically the world is like ours, only magic is much more common. It's not common like in the Dresden books or some other series, like the Xanth books by Piers Anthony. I mean, magic is everywhere. You can't go without it, but it is more commonplace than in our world. Of course, if you pick some of the books up, you never even know that. You just think it's taking place in our world. Some of the books don't really touch on the fact this is an alternate reality.
And so, what are some of the other writers that inspired you or have influenced you now that you're a writer?
Warren Murphy and Richard Sapir are my biggest influences. They wrote the Destroyer series, which is Remo Williams. A lot of people might remember that Fred Ward movie from the 80s.
Yeah, the one movie, yeah.
The one movie, not very well done. The books are a million times better. They still make the books. There are 150 of them. 151 is coming out, I think, in 3 months. And there's a spin-off series now that's about Remo's son and daughter. It's by a guy named Gerald Welch, who co-writes it with Warren Murphy. Mr. Sapir passed away years ago, and he's not involved in the series since probably the 60s or 70s of the number of books. But they're men's adventure novels in the sense that they're not like a lot of the other men's adventure novels. You look at a lot of men's adventure online and you'll see like scantily clad women with a Dick Tracy guy holding a gun on them or pointing a knife at him. That's part of men's adventure, but the other part of men's adventure was just a modernized version of pulp novels. Pulp novels being Tarzan, John Carter, Doc Savage is the king of the pulps, The Shadow, things of that nature. I've always enjoyed those kind of books because they're fast-paced and they're all about the central focus is action, not drama. In my opinion, one of the things that kills movies for me is when they have people stand around talking. That's appropriate for a stage, but in a movie I want to see things. You shouldn't stand around with dinosaurs eating plants in the background. You should be running from the dinosaurs. There needs to be action. So I go for more action style with all my books. They could probably be quite a bit longer than they are if I put more drama in and I slowed things down and I got more into exploring the world. But my focus is on the battle between good versus evil.
Oh, so your books are like fast-paced, nonstop action. I like those. So
they build. I try and pattern them after Doc Savage and Remo Williams, where it starts off, the mystery is who's the bad guy. Once they discover who the bad guy is, you have Act 2 is they fight the bad guy and lose. Act 3, they come back, fight the bad guy, kick his butt, book's over. So I try and follow a 3-act structure like that with every single one, because with a series, all the series I read growing up had the same structure, book after book after book. It was just you plug in a different bad guy, you plug in a different way to defeat the bad guy. Modern fiction a lot of times wants to develop the soap opera aspect of the interaction between the characters, and I do put some of that in because you have to please your readers, but I don't like to put it in where it slows it down. Everything builds and builds and builds, and I like to do rotating viewpoints where when you get to Act 3, part of the team's over here, part of the team's over there. You follow Team 1 for a few minutes, and then you get a cliffhanger. Boom. The next chapter, I'm over with Team 2. When they get to a cliffhanger, then I go back to Team 1. And I try and back and forth because I don't want you to stop reading. I want you to keep reading for that frantic pace, all building to the big climax, the big explosion at the end, basically. Although it's rarely an explosion, but the big showdown, the boss fight, if you would, in video game terms.
And where do you usually get your ideas for your stories?
A lot of them come from stuff like Coast to Coast AM. I've always been a fan of like the UFO shows, the Bigfoot shows, the ghost shows. I actually started reading more and more of that when I was working at the prosecutor's office, probably around 2004, 2005. It was a good way on my lunch break to completely take my mind off the depressing real-world crime I was dealing with. So I would read, what's the latest Bigfoot news? What's the latest UFO news? And I would see just crazy stories about stuff. It's like, what? I've never heard of that before. I loved In Search of with Leonard Nimoy when I was a kid. And then I watched Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. And I never really read a lot of that stuff, but I enjoyed it on TV. And then in the prosecutor's office on my lunch hours, I got to where I was reading it every day at lunch. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting. A mopinguari? What the heck is a mopinguari? I've never heard of that before. And I would read about it. That's a South American giant tree sloth that this doctor thinks has survived into the modern age. Just different creatures and cryptids and ghost stuff. So I'll take a lot of my story ideas from that and work them into the books. The first one I really made the book focused on like that was the Black Knight Satellite, and that's book 5 of my series, Black Knight Down. It's kind of a play on the military book Black Hawk Down. In that, the Black Knight Satellite's a UFO theory, ancient aliens theory, where people believe there's a prehistoric satellite orbiting the Earth that was detected in the 1950s, long before we started putting anything up. And if you Google it or go to Wikipedia, it'll tell you the whole story better than I can in the small amount of time we have tonight. But I really like the concept of, this unexplained artificial satellite over the Earth. What if it came down? What's inside it? So I built a story around that. And of course, that book, it's a coven of corporate witches. I call them corporate because they have banded together like a corporation, and they use their witchcraft to make themselves wealthy. They figure a way to get this satellite to crash to Earth because they think it's got something in it that's valuable. Of course, it's not what they thought was in it, and then the military team of stone soldiers have to come in. And the stone soldiers are primarily guys who've been turned to living stone, because I always like on the ghost hunter shows, somebody gets scratched by an invisible entity. They can't see it. Well, if you were made of stone, you couldn't be scratched. Or, if it got hot, it wouldn't bother you. If it got cold, it wouldn't bother you. If you fell in water, you wouldn't need to breathe. So I thought, wow, if you could only turn somebody into living stone, like the old Marvel comic, It, the Living Colossus, or Ben Grimm from the Fantastic Four, The Thing, what's a way to turn people into living stone? So I came up with a way for that. The bulk of the team are made of stone, but then there are other supernatural beings they've picked up along the series. There's a vampire doctor. There's a guy who's a werewolf. The leader of the team is the last of the Cold War supernatural soldiers. He doesn't turn to stone unless he gets injured. Instead of scabbing over, a section of his skin will turn to stone, and then it'll turn back to flesh. And he's got some other abilities and powers. And he's the Doc Savage style, old style character. And then the stone soldiers are the new generation, new style characters. But anyway, they have to always save the day and fight the big menace that normal flesh and blood people couldn't defeat.
And so they're part of the U.S. military then in your story?
Yeah, it's a special operations task force comprised of people from all the branches of service. It's a secret unit, just like in Hellboy. It's a small detachment that's secret but has the full support of the government behind it. So one of the books, number 2, I think, Brothers in Stone, which that's a parody on Brothers in Arms. The Brothers in Stone, they have Apache helicopters that they call in for fire support against this monster they're fighting. Originally in the series, they would get to their locations riding on actual aircraft. I would take real-world aircraft and kind of tweak them a little bit because I was in the Air Force, so I'm familiar with a lot of the aircraft. Now the series has progressed where they've got these magic portals and they can basically go anywhere on Earth they want instantaneously, which I originally did not plan that, but it just worked out that way, and I kind of like it better. It makes more sense. And I'll put in, there's guns, and they don't all just run up, and the vampire doesn't bite everybody on the neck. She uses knives and a sawed-off shotgun, and she fights. And the werewolf guy, of course, he does bite everybody on the neck because he's a werewolf. But basically, it's a mix of conventional warfare, unconventional warfare, I guess I should say, special operations style tactics and equipment mixed with magic and magical realism. And there's a lot of psychics. Psychics have a support role in the books. They're used to scout out locations or to interrogate prisoners. I try to work a little bit of everything in to give it a real world feel of, if you had magic, what would the military do with it? And what I really liked is when I started doing this, I couldn't find anybody else doing it. But now there's Mike Cole has a series called Shadow Ops. That's magic has come back to the whole world, and magic's everywhere. And now, militaries use magic on a large scale. And then there's American Craftsman. I can't even think. There's at least 7 or 8 other series. There's SEAL Team 666. Of course, I think those are regular guys who fight magic, whereas my guys are magic guys who fight magic. But it's military supernatural stuff is on the rise because I guess several of us around the same time realized, hey, nobody's doing this. We should do this.
Yeah, and I heard now even X-Files is coming back.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see that come back. I loved that show. I wish they'd bring Kolchak back a second time. They tried bringing him back a few years ago, and it was horrible. So I'm waiting for Kolchak to return good.
Yeah. And so now, do you still find time to read then, or are you too busy writing? And
Not really. I spend as much time as I can with my daughters. We watch a lot of B movies, and I play Xbox with them. I try and read, but I don't get to read anywhere near as much as I want. I may read like 3 or 4 books a year now, if I'm lucky. I used to read in high school I'd read 6 books a week. I was an avid reader, and unfortunately I still have all these paperbacks piled up and in boxes, but before I started writing I was reading maybe 10 or 12 books a year. I'm mainly a TV guy. I just love monster movies and cheesy sci-fi. I miss Mystery Science Theater a great deal. But yeah, I try and read when I can. One of my problems now is I don't want to read something and then subconsciously copy it or steal an idea from it, because I've just seen and been exposed to so much. I have a cousin who we're both big sci-fi comic book guys, and sometimes I'll email him, hey, has this been done before? For some reason this sounds familiar to me, and he'll think about it for a while, and he's like, no, I think you're thinking of this, which was slightly different, and it's like, okay, I'm good to use this then. Yeah, I don't want to plagiarize anybody, but also, what's the point in doing it if somebody else has already done it? I mean, I want to come up with a unique spin on stuff.
Do you have an online presence? Are you on Facebook and Twitter and all those places?
Sort of. I mean, I have a website for the books, stonesoldiers.info, and that keeps you sort of up to date. There's a blog that you can link through that's on blogger.com. Sometimes I'll post once or twice a week. Then I might go 3 or 4 weeks and not post. I have a Twitter handle at Troglodad, TROGLODAD, and I'll go through spurts in that where I'll post a whole bunch of stupid stuff for several days, and then I won't touch it again for a month. I tend to lurk on more than anything else online. I like to read. Most of my reading comes from the internet now. I mean, I read the internet every day, websites like theanomalist.com or mysteriousweuniverse.org. I like to read stuff like video game news, technical news, weird stories, that kind of stuff. My oldest daughter, and I started a podcast because she wanted to get into podcasting. So we have that now. That's called Weirdology101.com. We're only on episode 4.
What's the focus on that?
So I do have we introduce people to weird stuff because I did an interview with a guy one day, and he was asking me about a kappa, which is a Japanese water elemental. I put that in a short story. There's 4 short story prequels to my Stone Soldiers series. Each one's about a different type of elemental. And I wanted to get really obscure elementals that generally aren't used in fiction, and the kappa was one of them I found. And he's like, where in the heck did you come up with that? And, so my daughter wanted to podcast. I'm like, let's do something like that, because a lot of the stuff I talk with her about or we see when we watch movies she's never seen before. I'm like, there's a whole generation of kids who didn't grow up with In Search Of like I did. I had everybody was learning about it together back then. Now, people my age, maybe in their 30s, a little younger, we've been exposed to this stuff so much that when we talk about it, we all know what each other's talking about. But people in their 20s or their teens, they might be like, a Draugr? What's a Draugr? What's a Mapinguari? What's a Yowie? They don't know what we're talking about. And so I thought it would be cool for us to just go over an introduction. We don't go real in depth into it. We don't debate whether it's real or not. It's like, this is the thing. This is some examples of it in fiction. And, if you want to learn more, you can Google this. We on the webpage, I try and put some links to a few things here and there, and we have fun with it. That's why we called it Weirdology 101. It's your introduction to the strange and unusual, the supernatural, and the paranormal.
Yeah, sounds like fun. And I will have links to your books and your podcast and all that too. So for the listeners on the website or wherever they're listening, there'll be links. So look for the links. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and for talking to us about your books and your podcast. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. You can visit our site at get.thrillingreads.com/podcast for more information on our podcasts. And you can also subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcatcher, like iTunes, the most popular one, of course. Just search for Meet the Thriller Author, and you'll find me there. And I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Meet Thriller Author. Love to hear from you. Love to hear your comments and your feedbacks on the shows. And I'll have a new podcast, a new interview with a thriller author. They'll be posting them every Tuesday, so stay tuned for that. And don't forget to subscribe. And please visit my author website at alanpeterson.com.